Well, hello there. Welcome. Today, we are going to be reading some spooky stories. As you can tell, well, maybe, I guess, it is close to the end of September. And with the end of September brings in the spooky month. Now, I personally have never celebrated Halloween. It's something that my family just never did. So I'm not super passionate about, spooky month. However, I do like reading stories, and so to prepare for spooky month, I thought that we could read some of my personal favorite no-sleeps. So I almost just made a big mistake. So, I think it is time for us to move by the fire. I hope that you are ready. It is spooky month. It is spooky month. Hello, welcome Gengar, welcome Psychedelic. I hope that you guys are ready. So I have some of my personal favorite no-sleeps prepared. Now, a couple of them are a little bit a couple of them are a little bit graphic or have some disturbing themes. So before any of those no sleeps happen, I will go ahead and give a disclaimer ahead of time. So don't worry, if you're not uncomfortable with certain things, I will let you know beforehand. So the very first one that we are going to read is called The Rotted Man. It was posted 9 years ago by the Lyrie Valley. So we will go ahead and start there. Also, if the audio is off at all, just let me know and I'll go ahead and fix it. When I was a child of only 3, the rotted man came for me. Late one night from across... Whoa, sorry. Let me restart that. See... let me just put this out here. Part of the reason why I want to read these stories is because I suffered a little bit of a head injury a couple years ago, and ever since then, words get really jumbled up for me. So this is a learning process for me. Your country doesn't celebrate Halloween either? Oh, interesting. Huh. Oh, it's kind of nice to know I'm not alone, because I'm from Burgerland, and in Burgerland, everybody celebrates it, so that's kind of nice. When I was a child of only 3, the rotted man came for me. Late one night, from my open door, he slowly crept across the floor. He took me by the hand and said, "I'll save you from this life of dread." We left the house in the early morn and took his carriage of blackened thorn. We rode for hours through thick, dense fog to a darkened, unlit, swamp-filled bog, where topless trees with hanging moss were shields from the unseen winter frost. The thick, wet heat from the dense, cool air crept up your back and through your hair. He took me to his house of bones on a path laid with cobblestones. Upon his door hung a head of a child with hair of fiery red. His hall was bathed in blood-red tile. The walls were stacks of flesh in piles. He told me of his protective view and begged that I should join him too. He smiled, and through his rotted lips I saw 1,000 children's fingertips. He promised me that the world would pay and told me that I could stay. Then we entered a smaller room, and the rotted man gave me a red balloon. Then I saw my mom through tinted glass. The man with her was talking fast. The tears were pouring from her eyes. The man then held her while she cried. Then the rotted man did the strangest thing. He sat down with me and began to sing a soft, nice tune that filled my head with puppy dogs and fresh baked bread. It was then I noticed that the rotted man was simply old and had a tan. And then my mom burst in the room. And then my mom burst in the room. The feel of warmth, her sweet The feel of warmth, her sweet perfume. She hugged me tight and swore to me, from here on out, Dad would let us be. No more bruises, no more fights, no more screaming in the night. The rotted man had saved our lives by taking those who beat their wives, and children that cry when they are dropped and are beaten senseless until they stop. I thank the rotted man a lot, and never have I forgot that the thing I feared saved my life. They had found my father with a knife. There are real horrors on this earth. Some are subjected to them at birth. We were saved by the man made of rot. I was lucky, but many are not. So that was The Rotted Man. That was, sheesh. I like that story a lot. It's a very sad subject, but the first time that I read this story, I at first thought, oh, the child is dead. And like when they saw their mom crying, I was like, oh, the child is dead. And so, nope, it was not. I don't know. Personally, I like that story a lot. I hope you guys enjoyed it too. Does anyone have marshmallows? I got the graham crackers. I have chocolate. I feel like I had a dream like this. That's not concerning at all. Well, hey, at least the story had a happy ending, right? There are worse things to have dreams about, I suppose. So this next one, I will have to give a little bit of a content warning. This next one is a little bit graphic, it's a little bit gory, and I also have some sound effects prepared. I like that it rhymes. Me too! Yeah, most of these are just like, regular stories, so having it like nicely laid out, kind of like a poem, I think was really comfy. And the fact that it ended up being a happy story made it better. But yes, so this one is a little bit graphic, and I have sound effects prepared. I don't know how well I'm gonna do with cueing the sound effects, but I will try my best. So this one is called Symmetry, and it was posted by You Always Through, and it was posted 8 years ago. I love symmetry. I'm not sure exactly why, but I've loved it since I was a kid. Most children are messy and forgetful of their things. Not me. I knew everything has a place, and in my room, everything was right where it belongs. My parents didn't have it. My grandparents didn't have it either. Not a single person in my family had it. I've started referring to it as it because I truly believe it's a thing inside me. A stowaway that shouldn't be there, but lives inside me. It's a need, a desire, a longing to be perfect. Perfect on both sides. As an adult, I'm at the point where I can't live my life normally. I can't keep a job. Women don't stay with me because they can't handle it. Honestly, I don't care when they leave. They're messy and make things difficult. They roll over to my side of the bed instead of staying on their own. They leave dishes in one side of the sink, but not the other. I can't work anymore, so when they leave for the day, I have to stay home and fix everything. It's a relief when they leave for good. That feeling never lasts, though. Eventually, it comes back and finds something else that needs fixing. You may be asking, why would I seek out relationships to begin with if I can't stand them? Well, it's hard for me to sleep in the middle of the bed all night without moving. Other than the relationship problem, my life is pretty much in order. I say pretty much because there is one last issue that must be dealt with. You see, I have what's called heterochromia iridium, or 2 different colored irises. My right eye was cornflower blue, my left pale green. Both my parents have cornflower blue eyes, my siblings and cousins as well. My green eye is the broken one. It makes me unbalanced. Every time I look at myself in the mirror, it stares right back at me. It's all I think about now. Everything is in its right place except my green little mistake. It didn't hurt at first. when I dug the spoon under my eye, it didn't even hurt when it popped out and was hanging by my cheek. Was it shock that was keeping the pain away? Or was it? I snipped the optic nerve and blotted the warm fluids that were streaming down my face. My vision being cut in half was a strange sensation. What was left of the dangling flesh I placed back in the now empty hole. I bandaged the wound, rinsed the spoon, and went to sleep. I woke up happy. I slept better than I had in years. It was finally done. I was fixed. I got out of bed and stumbled to the bathroom. My body ached and my head was on fire. I flipped the switch in the bathroom and the light was blinding. I slowly removed the bandage that was soaked with blood and was sticking to my face like tape. When I looked up to the mirror, my stomach turned. Only then had I realized what I'd done to myself, and I couldn't believe it. There was a hole in the left side of my face, but not the right. I was unbalanced. Again. It was much harder digging out the second eye. My hands were shaking, and when I dug the spoon in, I missed several times, puncturing my pupil 3 times before I got it in the right place. Once the eye popped out, I reached for my scissors to finish the job. The blood from the previous night had dried on the blades, so the scissors didn't cut very well. You know, when you were a kid in elementary school and your teacher made you cut construction paper for art projects? Did you ever try to cut too many pieces at once, but the scissors couldn't take it? The blades would kind of fold over each other and the paper would get pinned between them. That's what happened with my eye. The optic nerve was pinned between the 2 blades. It was stuck, and as I tried desperately and frantically to make it unstuck, I slipped on the blood and started falling to the floor. Reflexes kicked in, and I let go of my eye to try to break my fall with my hand. The weight of the stuck scissors on my hanging eye was unbearable! I knew I couldn't stand it long enough to make it to the kitchen to get a knife, so I pulled it straight out of my head. I felt the flesh tear from inside my skull. I felt it rip and spew liquids everywhere. I knew I was crying, but there was no telling the tears from the blood from the ocular fluid. When I heard the wet slap of bloody flesh against the tile floor, I knew I was done. I knew it was done. I could live my life now, without having to see people's awful, messy, uneven lives. Relief washed over me, and I knew it would last this time. I had never felt this way before, never had this much hope. As I laid in my bathroom on that cold, wet, sticky tile, I smiled for the first time in years. Dictated, but not read. So that was Symmetry. Oh, hi, Val. Great timing. Hi. I had a bit of a content warning for that one, but you probably came in part way. Is this pre-recorded? No, I downloaded the sound effects and just was reading while I was trying to click on the right sound effect. I hope I got the right ones each time. I hope that was okay. I've never seen someone with 2 different colored eyes. Yeah, heterochromia, I've only seen a couple people with it. It's pretty rare, I think, but yeah, I think that people that have it, like, look really, really cool with it. What 2 colors would you get if you had it? I have blue eyes, so I'd probably have one pale blue eye and 1 green eye. Well, that's disturbing. Yeah, sorry. I know that one was I know that one was a little a little gross. Sorry, that's the only one that's like that, I promise. Content warning for the next one, though. The next one is a little creepy. I was fully convinced that this was pre-recorded. Oh, thank you. I'm glad it went smoothly. I honestly didn't know how well it would turn out because I was like trying to read while also clicking off, so I'm glad that it came out good. Didn't miss a single beat. Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you, Val. No, I could feel a sound. Ugh. Sorry. Okay, moving on. Our next one is a little bit creepy. I mean they're all creepy. That's kind of the point of No Sleeps, huh? This one, a little bit of a trigger warning is like murdering and kidnapping children, because this one is called How to Successfully Ransom a Child. This came out 4 years ago and was posted by Easy Misery. Hello, No Sleep. I have lurked on this site for a while, but I feel it is time to share some things with you. Honestly, I'm only doing this because I am sick of hearing about people kidnapping kids and doing it all wrong. I have successfully ransomed over a dozen children. Some might call me an expert. I want to tell you how to do it correctly. Maybe then you'll start doing it right. I'm going to use my most recent conquest as an example. Her name is Sophie. You don't need to know my name. The first step is to choose a kid. Gender doesn't matter, but I prefer girls. If you want the best ransom, you'll want to pick a family that is tight-knit. The more the parents love the kid, the more they'll give it up to give it back. The more they'll give up to get it back. Choose a family in a town you don't live in. Ideally, it should be at least an hour away. You must have no connection to the family. They don't know you, but you will learn everything about them. I picked Sophie because she had braided pigtails. I like that. She was just big enough to do some things on her own, but still little, small, smooth. I grabbed Sophie on her way home from school, but before taking her, I did my research. This is where so many people fail. You have to study the family. You have to know when they leave the house, what hobbies they have, who visits, and where the breaks in the chain are. You need to spend a lot of time watching, waiting. There is so much waiting, but it makes the prize so much better. Sophie's family lived in a farmhouse in a small town. Their police force consisted of a sheriff and only a few officers. A smaller police force will help you. To make yourself less noticeable, don't use the same car to watch the house in. Changing colors and kinds of cars will make it impossible to track you. It took 5 months for the perfect opportunity. Sophie usually walked home with a friend. The way home was through a field, out of sight from any house. But the friend was a barrier. I got lucky. The friend was sick. She didn't go to school, so Sophie walked alone, her backpack hanging off one arm, her precious blonde hair braided in those long, silken pigtails. Don't hurt her. Make it fast. One arm around the diaphragm, the other over the mouth. She is small. Carry her to your car. Don't lean in and smell her hair. Once you have the kid, the real work starts. You'll want to send a ransom note in the mail. Emails and phone calls are too easily traceable. A letter you can simply place in any mailbox. Leave the return address blank. Keep her quiet. No one can hear her, but the silence makes it better. In your letter, you'll explain that you have the child. You will not harm the child as long as the family is willing to pay the ransom. As far as the amount of money, it needs to be a reasonable amount. Significant enough to warrant an abduction, but low enough that a typical family could raise the amount. I usually stick between $20,000 and $50,000. An average family can get a loan for that amount if needed. Ideally, the letter should arrive the day after the kid is taken. The family will have already called the police. This letter will incite even more fear. You cannot go to the house. Do not drive by. Do not go to the town, no matter how much you want to. And you will want to. You may watch the news. You may rub the strands between your fingers. You may plan your next move, but nothing else. In the first letter, you'll simply say you will call with more instructions. Do not call. The family will be waiting by the phone. They will not leave the house. The FBI may have been called. A wiretap will be placed. Every conversation will be recorded. You cannot let them hear your voice. Sophie's hair tastes like laundry soap and freshly mowed grass. Next, it is time to write your second letter. It should be sent 2 weeks after the first. In this letter, you will include something written by the kid. This is to prove that it is still alive. Make it write about things you would have no way of knowing. You should also include a picture of it, fully dressed with a newspaper. The letter will remind them of the ransom amount. Say you are anxious to get the money. You will contact them soon with the drop location. Remember the smoothness. Sophie. Sophie. Soft, sweet, syrup. After the second letter is another waiting period. This one is longer. It has to be at least a few months. That's when you will be tested. You will want to call them, to reach out, but trust your instincts. The prize is worth the waiting. Spend time with Sophie. Tell her about your father. Your secrets are safe with her. You can trust her. When the wait is over, you will send the last letter. In it, you will include a picture of the kid in different clothes, hair cut but smiling, holding another newspaper. It can write something to its parents, but it isn't really important. What does matter is your exact instructions. Number 1. The money must be in cash and untraceable. Number 2. The drop point must be in the middle of a popular wooded area in the early morning, around 5 a.m. The area should be at least an hour away. Number 3. The entire family must bring the money to the site. Number 4. No cops allowed. Number 5. The family must wait an hour at the location with the money in the spot. Then the kid will be released to them. Number 6. The reunited family must then return home immediately and never speak of this event again. Of course, the family will not follow all of the rules. Police will no doubt join them at the site hiding, but that's okay. You never planned to go there in the first place. After all, Sophie has been dead since the day you took her. She has to die. It's part of the plan. You use her, love her, take her hair, and then she is gone. It is gone. It is now with the other its. Bloated, empty shells. Deflated balloons hanging from the ceiling. You have to make it write the letters when you take it home. You tell it what dates to write. You take the 2 pictures that day too. You take the 2 pictures that first day too. Just edit the newspaper to match the correct dates. It's not hard. The waiting is hard. But the prize is worth the wait. Silken, braided pigtails. You can suck on the ends as you drive to the house. It tastes like a little dead girl. But the hair was already dead. No one will be at the house when you get there. Everyone, including the authorities, will be at the drop site. Now it is their turn to wait for something that will never come. You have to break into the house. This is where you will collect your ransom. You may take anything that is of any worth. Televisions, jewelry, computers. If the computers do not have a password, most don't, there is another task you must complete. Delete all photos of it. Log into any social media, as most people leave themselves logged in, and delete any reference to it. Photos, quotes, artwork, do the same around the house. Take all the family pictures, take any art it drew, anything with its name on it, make it look like there was never a child in the house at all. The process can take a long time. Be thorough. Think of the braids in your front seat, the smoothness. And finally, as you drive away, you can collect your ransom, your prize. Sure, you can sell the items you stole. It won't make you that much money, but that's not the real reason to do this. What you will collect is the knowledge that you destroyed that family. They will never see their kid again, never smell its hair. You own it now. They will never recover. All of their treasured items are gone. You have stolen their sanity, joy, safety. They will never be able to trust again. And that fact tastes almost as good as the pigtails. So there you go. That's how you successfully ransom a child. Now, all of you out there have no excuse to do it wrong. And that was How to Successfully Ransom a Child. Very disturbing, very, very disgusting. I hate it, thank you. So, oh, that one makes me so uncomfortable. I'm gonna mute real quick and take a quick drink. This makes me want to lock my door and check my windows. I know, right? But thankfully my country isn't known for kidnapping. Oh, that's good. Tastes. I feel like the writers are just serial killers that are too scared to do anything. Probably. Like, man, to be able to come up with something that like, complex, You have to put a lot of thought into it. This one was so good in a morbid way. Yeah, this one was really, really good. I liked it a lot. So I have 2 long ones and 1 like medium-sized one. So we're gonna do one of the long ones next. This one is called Third Parent. And again, I'm going to give a content warning on this one because it is also very disturbing. So there is a part of this that I will actually not be reading. I will just summarize what happened and skip over it, as there is some like sexual assault written into it, and there's also implied rape. It's a lot. It's definitely a good unsettling story, but I'm not going to. I wanna leave you here feeling uncomfortable, but not in that kind of a way. So I will. I'll be cutting out just like one part that, while well written, is a little too much. At least in my personal opinion. So this one is called Third Parent. It was written 5 years ago by Elias Witherow. Yeah. My name is Matt, and my childhood wasn't normal. Not by any stretch of the word. Something happened to my family that is almost impossible to understand, but I'm going to try my best to explain those 5 years. 5 years of my life I spent in terror. 5 years we all lived in fear. 5 years we'll never get back. My father, Spence, wasn't a very strong man, both physically and mentally. He was the type of dad who often let our mother speak for the both of them. Now, he wasn't a complete pushover, but he often was content to just go with the flow rather than alter it. He worked hard and dedicated his free time to us, his family. He made sure our needs were taken care of. His soft assurances, the unseen foundation of our family. My mother, Megan, was the head of our house. She was outspoken, independent, and extremely loyal to all of us. She loved my father's quiet ways, and even from a young age, I could see the chemistry flowing strong between them. My little sister Stephanie was a year younger than I. She looked up to me, and my father always told me it was my responsibility to look after her. We got along as best as we could, and even though I gave her all kinds of brotherly hardship, I did love her. We lived in a suburban middle-class community, a complete stock photo of the American dream. My father worked a respectable 9-to-5 job while my mother taught yoga classes out of the house. It was a neat life, organized and constructed. Everything was discussed, considered, and acted upon as a family. It was a good home to grow up in. But that was before he showed up. That was before the third parent. July 1989. I was sitting at the dinner table, waiting for my father to finish cooking. It was his turn tonight, and my stomach roared for his rosemary chicken. My sister Stephanie lay on her stomach in the living room coloring. Her golden blonde hair fell across her shoulders in waves, and she looked up at me, smiling. She extended what she had been working on, and I nodded, completely unimpressed. She sniffed at me and continued her sketch. My mother walked into the kitchen, pulling her hair back from her freshly showered face. "Everyone gone?" my father asked from the stove. My mother nodded. "Yes, Spence, the house is ours again. It's so much better teaching yoga in the basement, so much cooler. I'm glad we finished the basement over the winter. My clients are relieved as well. It's a scorcher out there today." "Mom, can you sit down so we can eat?" I begged from my spot at the table. My mother turned to me and laughed. "Matt, the hungriest 60-year-old on this side of Mississippi. Why don't you ask your dad to hurry up? He's the one cooking." I placed my forehead on the table's lip. "Dad, I'm going to die." Stephanie looked up from her coloring book. "Matt, don't be crazy." "You're crazy," I muttered, not looking up. "Nuh-uh," she said, sticking her tongue out at me. All right, my father said, turning from the stove. In his hands, he held a steaming platter of chicken. "Come sit down, Steph. The food is ready," I ordered my sister, the sight of the seasoned meat causing me to salivate. As she pulled herself up from the floor, my mother taking a place beside me, we all froze as someone knocked on the front door. My mother and father exchanged puzzled looks. My dad placed the food down on the table and told us all to hold on a minute. Groaning, I watched him walk to the front door. He peeked through the keyhole and I saw him visibly tense, his whole body cementing like a statue. "Spence, who is it?" my mother asked. My father slowly turned back around to us, all blood draining from his face. His eyes were wide and I saw fear dilate his pupils. He licked his lips and shot Stephanie and I a look. "Spence?" my mom pressed, her face contorting with concern. "No, this can't happen. Not again," I heard my father whisper, staring off into the middle distance. The door shook as another series of knocks echoed throughout the house. My mother stood, her voice cracking with contagious fear. "Spence, who is it? What's going on?" "I'm so sorry," my father mumbled, clutching his stomach, his face a pale sheet. "I have to let him in." Before any of us could say anything else, my dad turned and opened the door. Dying sunlight blinded me, and I squinted to see who our unannounced visitor was. "Hi, I'm Tommy Taffy. It's good to see you again, Spence." I watched as my father slowly backed away from the open door. A man entered our house and shut the door behind him. My young mind tried to make sense of what I was seeing, but even at that young age, I knew something wasn't right with this unexpected guest. He was about 6 foot and had a shock of golden hair cut tight along his scalp. He wore khaki shorts and a white t-shirt that said "Hi" in red cartoon font. But that wasn't what caught my eye. It was his skin. It was completely devoid of pores, a perfectly smooth, creamy texture that looked almost like soft plastic. His face was a pool of gentle pink, his mouth a cheerful cut along his cheeks revealing a white strip of teeth. But they weren't teeth. It was just a smooth, edgeless row, like he had a mouthguard on. His nose was just a slight rise out of his face, like a doll, void of nostrils. And his eyes. His eyes were twin puddles of sparkling blue, shining out at us from his flawless, eerie face. They were wide, like he was in a constant state of surprise, and they shifted around the room to look at us in quick, jarring motion. His smile widened, and he raised a flawless hand out to us at the table. "Hi, I'm Tommy Taffy. It's good to meet you." I noticed he didn't have any fingernails or skin defects. No wrinkles or bruising, nothing. It was like he was a living, talking, human-sized doll. "Spence?" my mother croaked, recognition blooming in her eyes. "It's going to be okay, Megan," my father said, voice shaking. "Let's be polite to our new guest, okay?" The man, Tommy, cocked his head towards my father. "He. My dad took a step back, raising his hands. "I mean, our new friend." The frozen smile never left Tommy's molded face. He. There was no humor in his strange laugh. It sounded like he was clearing his throat or imitating a really bad chuckle. It was too pronounced, each syllable sounding too deliberate. My father forced a smile onto his face. I meant... He looked desperately at my mother, who offered him no help, her body frozen in absolute fear. I meant, meet your new parent, kids. Stephanie, who was standing by her mother, frowned.
He's not our dad, you are. And why does he look so funny?
Stephanie, my mother hissed, gripping my sister's shoulder. Tommy laughed and walked forward to the couch. Tommy laughed and walked forward to crouch in front of Stephanie. It's not nice to make fun of people who look different, is it? My sister looked at her feet, blushing. Tommy tasseled her hair. It's okay, buck up, kiddo. We're going to get along just fine. I'm going to help your parents raise you. It's a big job being a mommy and a daddy. Sometimes mommy and daddies need help. Tommy turned to my parents, that ever-present plastic smile stretching his face. I helped their mommy and daddies raise them. Isn't that right, Spence? Megan? Megan pulled Stephanie away as my father nodded nervously. That's right, kids. He did. Tommy smiled and turned to me. I was still sitting at the table, taking the odd scene in. I didn't understand what was happening, didn't know who this weird-looking man was or what he wanted. What he was saying didn't make sense. But my parents seemed to know him, so I kept my speculations to myself. And you must be mad, Tommy said, walking over to me. I didn't look at him, training my eyes to stare at my empty plate. I suddenly wasn't hungry anymore. I could feel the strange man beside me, his presence filling my head. I licked my lips and felt my heart begin to race. I didn't like this intruder. Something about him felt dangerous. Tommy walked behind me, chuckling, his hand sliding over my slender shoulders. Oh, it looks like we have a shy one. That's okay, I'll help him with that, he said to my parents. His fingers dug into my skin and I winced, but kept my mouth shut. Don't touch him, my mother hissed, eyes growing wide. Tommy looked up at her, mouth stretched. My dad outstretched his hand, alarmed. Don't be so rude, Megan. Tommy continued to stare at my mother, who nervously lowered her eyes.
Are you staying for dinner?
Stephanie suddenly asked, breaking the tense silence. The eerie doll man let go of my shoulders, one of his hands sliding across my cheek and into my hair. Oh yes, I'll be here for quite a while. And that was how Tommy Taffy entered our lives. At 6 years old, I don't know any better than to seriously question what was happening. Even though my parents acted unsettled at his arrival, their constant assurances that he was a friend pushed away any lingering doubt I had. As the days turned into weeks, I began to grow accustomed to Tommy's presence in our house. My initial fear slowly receded to wary caution. I soon learned that Tommy didn't like company. Whenever my mother had her yoga classes, Tommy would pull her off into a corner and whisper something to her. I would watch all this with silent eyes. I would see my mother's face grow pale, and she would nod, whispering back unknown assurances. Then Tommy would turn, that ever-present smile plastered on his face, and walk upstairs until the class was over. My parents told Stephanie and I that we weren't to talk to Tommy. My parents told Stephanie and I that we weren't to talk about Tommy to our friends. Outside of the house, Tommy wasn't a part of our lives. I don't know why, but both my sister and I obeyed. Another thing I noticed was that Tommy never ate. He would sit at the table with us, but never partook in the meal. Stephanie asked him once if he was ever hungry, and Tommy just smiled at her silently and stroked her head. During the evenings, he would gather our family into the living room and give us a short lesson on how to be a good person. My parents never spoke during these talks, just sat next to us nodding. Tommy told us not to make fun of others, to love our friends and enemies, and always help those in need. He told us that's why he was here with us, to help my parents raise us. that we could come talk to him if we had a problem at school or didn't know how to handle certain situations. It went on like this for a month, and that's when my mother lost it. I'm gonna take a quick drink. August 1989. My father had just arrived home from work, and I was sitting at the kitchen table doing my homework. My mother was cooking dinner, and Stephanie was practicing her dance for an upcoming school play. She was going to be a ballerina and had 3 weeks to learn a few simple spins and twirls. She had been diligently practicing over the past few days, but just couldn't get it right. She was young, and her temper was getting the better of her. That's when Tommy decided to help her. He had been sitting on the couch watching her when suddenly he rose and stood behind my sister, placing his hands gently over her shoulders. "Let me help, sweetie," he cooed, his voice carrying a cheerful note. My mother spun around from the stove and I saw her visibly tense. She didn't like Tommy touching us. She gripped the wooden spoon in her hand until her knuckles went white, watching as Tommy crouched and cupped Stephanie's body with his. He took her hands in his from behind and guided her arms and waist, his cheek pressing gently against my sister's. "Tommy, let her learn on her own," my mother said, her voice shaking. Tommy didn't even look at her, just kept guiding my sister. I could hear my father coming down the stairs, freshly changed from a day at the office. Tommy spun my sister, and for the first time, she nailed the twirl, her little feet twisting her body in a complete circle. Tommy clapped his hands once, and then leaned down and kissed Stephanie on the cheek. "Good girl!" "Don't do that!" my mother shrieked, dropping the spoon, her face draining of blood. I jumped in my seat at the table and swallowed hard. I didn't know why my mom was getting so upset. He was just helping her. I also knew, deep down, that it was a bad idea to yell at the new member of our family. It was the gut instinct of a child, a gentle warning that rumbled in my head. Tommy stood. My father was standing at the foot of the stairs now, frozen, unsure what to make of the confrontation. "Megan, what's wrong?" he asked. My mother's eyes never left Tommy. "Spence, I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending everything is all right. We know what this monster is. We know what he did to our town all those years ago. I want him out of our house." My father's eyes went wide, panic blooming in his face. "Megan!" He licked his lips, eyes darting back and forth at all of us. "Don't be rude. Tommy has been a big help." My mom grit her teeth. "Stop that. Stop pretending we want him here. I can't watch this happen. I want him out!" Very slowly, Tommy walked into the kitchen and stood in front of my mother. He looked down at her, his perfect blue eyes shining like crystal moons. His voice was like frozen silk. "Megan, would you come down into the basement with me? I need to have a few words with you." My mother took a step back. "Get away from me! Get away from my family! You're not welcome here anymore." She turned desperate eyes to my father. "Spence, do something!" My dad raised his hands in a gesture of helplessness. I could see he was terrified. Stephanie was watching from the living room, her lip quivering, eyes watering. I suddenly wanted to go comfort her, but I felt glued to my chair. Come on now, Megan. Just a quick word." "Fuck you!" my mother spat. I gasped, heart dropping into my stomach. I had never heard my mother swear before, and it scared me stiff. Suddenly, Tommy grabbed my mother by the back of her neck, the smile never leaving his face, and yanked her to the basement door. "Spence, stop him! Help me!" My mother screamed, helplessly trying to remove Tommy's iron grip from her. Tommy shot my dad a look that froze him where he stood. "I'm sorry, Megan. We need to do what he says," he cried. Stephanie was now openly crying, hands at her sides, tears running down her face. I felt sick as I watched Tommy open the basement door and drag my mother down into the darkness. The door slammed closed behind him. It was silent for a few minutes, and then the screams began. I had never heard my mother scream before, and the sound of it shattered me. My father ran into the kitchen and scooped me up into his arms, then snatched up Stephanie in his other one. He marched us upstairs into his bedroom and dumped us on the bed. We sat huddled like that for hours, none of us speaking a word. My mother continued to scream. Finally, long after the sun set, we heard the basement door open. "Mom, sleeping in the basement tonight," Tommy called out. March 1991. Two years passed. After that night, my mother never resisted or talked back to Tommy again. When she came out of the basement the following morning, I expected to see her covered in bruises and blood, but I could see no visible signs of violence. I was too young to understand what had happened, why my mother now walked with a limp and would for the rest of her life. She didn't speak to my father for a month, and even though it was just enough to get by, I noticed my father crying a lot during those 2 years. I didn't know what was happening to my family, but I kept my mouth shut and obeyed the rules. Listen to Tommy. Don't talk about Tommy to others. Things went calm during those 2 years. Tommy continued to give us life lessons and be a part of our home, but no one but my family knew he was living with us. He was our secret, the dark star that hung above our heads. I learned to smile around Tommy, as did my sister. If he thought we were happy, he seemed more relaxed. But that night my mother challenged him. That changed something. Every couple months, Tommy would assert his authority over my parents. He would test them, stretch the limits of their patience and nerves. Most of the time, my father and mother would humbly submit to whatever mind game he played with them. Most of the time, he would do or say something to Stephanie or myself. It always made me uncomfortable. Sometimes he would have us sit on his lap while he stroked our hair. Sometimes he'd sing strange songs to my sister about love. Sometimes he would make us take a bath together while he watched. I always put on a brave face during these times. Stephanie was young still, so she wasn't as bothered as I was. It was uncomfortable, and I would look to my parents for guidance. With pale faces, they'd nod silently, and I continued in whatever activity we were forced into doing. It was in the early part of 1991 when the next awful thing happened to my family. Tommy pushed the limits once again. And this is where I am going to take another drink, and also if anyone else has joined during this part, I'm giving a content warning right here. I will be skipping one part of this story that will come later. However, there is implied rape, so if that is a trigger for you, I would recommend leaving the stream for about, 10 minutes and then coming back if you want to hear the end of the story. I rubbed sleep from my eyes and looked at my race car clock on the wall. The glow-in-the-dark hands read 2 a.m. I could hear something in the hallway outside my room. It sounded like someone crying. Where was Tommy? I checked the dark corners of my room to make sure he wasn't there, watching me sleep. When I was assured he wasn't, I pulled the covers away and slipped to the floor. I crept to my door and looked out into the darkness. I could see a figure sitting on the floor by my sister's closed door. A person. I squinted in the black and realized it was my father with his hands over his face. He was sobbing, his back against the wall. "Dad?" I whispered. My father looked up and immediately shooed me back into my room. I just stood there as my eyes adjusted to the night. My father's face was a mess of blood and bruises. "Go back to bed, Matt, please," he cried. I took a hesitant step out into the hallway.
Dad, what happened to your face? What's going on? Did Tommy do that?
My father's eyes went wide and he shushed me. No, of course not. Don't say such things. Tommy is he's here to help us be a better family. I walked closer to my dad and froze as I passed my sister's door. I could hear muffled cries from inside. I could hear fear.
Dad?
I whispered, pointing to the door.
What's wrong with Steph?
My father wiped a trail of blood from his lips, eyes watering, anguish stretching his features. Come here, Matt. I crawled into his outstretched arms as something loud banged against the wall from my sister's room. I jumped, and my father curled me up into his chest. I could feel tears drip onto my head as he fought back misery.
Tommy's in there, isn't he?
I said quietly. My dad sniffled. Yes, son. I looked up into his bloody face.
What did you do, Dad?
My dad tried to smile, but his face wouldn't cooperate. He wanted to do something with your sister I didn't like. I told him no. As he spoke, I realized I could hear my mother crying from the bedroom. My dad cupped his hand under my chin. We can't say no to Tommy, okay? Remember that. My sister screamed from her bedroom, a shrill, piercing cry that shook me to my soul. I gripped my father's arm.
Why is he here? I whispered. Why can't he just go away?
My father was silent a moment, and then he lowered his mouth to my ear. Listen to me, Matt. This is very important. When you grow up, do not have children. He follows those with children. I shifted in my father's arms as something was dragged across the hardwood floor from the other side of the wall. My father grit his teeth, more tears spilling. We don't know who he is or what he is. He came to our town when we were little boys and girls, just like you and Stephanie. Your mother and I lived 2 houses down from one another. Tommy infested our street. I don't know how. He was everywhere, always. He'd be at my house, but also across the street, and also at your mother's, all at the same time. I don't know what he wants, what his purpose is. He just showed up one day. He just showed up and wouldn't go away. God knows my father tried.
Is that how Grandpa died?
I asked. I had never met my grandpa. I just knew he had died years before I was born. My father nodded. Yes, Matt. Tommy had to teach him a lesson. He had to teach the entire street a lesson. After that...
Why can't you just kill him?
I whispered ever so softly. My dad brought his mouth closer to my ear, his voice barely audible. We tried everything. We burned him, shot him, cut him into pieces, but it never worked. He always came back knocking at our door, and someone had to pay. Someone always had to pay. If we didn't follow his rules, someone had to pay. Tommy was our secret. He was our invisible monster hidden from the outside world. Deaths were covered up. Abuse was brushed under the rug because we knew. We knew if anyone said a word, Tommy would make it bad for whoever had to face his punishment. I digested all of this with the understanding of an 8-year-old, and the only thing I could think to say was,
when is he going away?
My father kissed the top of my head. 3 more years. The bedroom door suddenly opened and my father jumped, tumbling me out of his arms. Tommy stood in the darkness, his face perfectly composed, except he was breathing hard. His plastic-looking face scared me, his 2 blue eyes glowing out of the black. Tommy jabbed a thumb over his shoulder at the now silent bedroom. She's going to sleep like a log tonight. September 1993. We had 1 year left. 1 more year. I could almost see the desperation in my parents' eyes grow every day, begging the calendar to advance. We were almost through the nightmare. I thought a lot about what my father had told me that horrible night in the hallway. I thought about what he must have gone through as a child, what he must have experienced. I wondered how bad things must have gotten for Tommy to murder my grandfather. I realized now that despite all the awful things Tommy was doing, my father's submission was keeping us alive. His agonized silence kept Tommy's wrath at bay. Looking back, I can't imagine the mental torture he endured during those 5 years. Stephanie didn't talk much after that night in March. I noticed her charismatic personality decline drastically, and suddenly she was an unsmiling, silent child. I don't think she understood what happened to her. And as she grew up, I think her mind slowly began to build a wall, blocking that night out from her mind's eye. My mother and father seemed to be extra compliant the last year. They engaged in Tommy's nighttime lessons and with added enthusiasm, and my mother desperately made sure Stephanie and I reacted in ways that made Tommy happy. But I didn't make it out unscathed. Tommy was sure to make his mark on our entire family. Alright, so this is the section that I'm going to skip. Basically, Matt, the narrator boy, he got a Playboy magazine from his friends. Tommy came into the room and sexually assaults Matt. And so I'm actually just going to skip this part. It's very uncomfortable. There's one thing about implied versus actually, reading actual sexual assault, so I'm going to skip this part. If you do want to read this story for yourself, you are more than welcome to. I will state the name of this again, and I'll put in links to all the stories that I read after the stream ends, but I'm just going to skip to the next part. July 1994. As the days marched closer and closer towards July, my family developed a silent, optimistic... My family developed a silent optimism, a desperate plea to make this all stop, to make it all go away. My mother and father made sure there was no reason for another hard lesson. They bent over backwards for Tommy, begging through clamped teeth that we'd all make it to July without another incident. Only July 3rd, we woke up to find Tommy Taffy was gone. 5 years to the day. We couldn't believe it. He had simply vanished overnight. We checked the entire house, my mother weeping tears of relieved joy that the nightmare was finally over. Over checking every inch of the house 3 times over, we met in the living room, embracing one another as a family. Tommy had moved on. The sentence was over. My father called out of work, and we went far away for 2 weeks to the beach. During those 2 weeks, I kept expecting to wake up with Tommy standing over me, that horrific smile on his face. But he didn't. It was over. My parents did their best to rebuild our family, fill in the cracks that had been made during those long years, and I love them dearly for it. But some monsters just can't be forgotten. I don't know what Tommy Taffy was, or where he came from. I don't think I'll ever know. What was his purpose? Why did he do those awful things to us? I pore over the possible answers until my head splits and I find myself crying. The memory's too much to dig up. Some things are just left dead in the past. But I haven't forgotten what my father told me in the hallway that awful night outside my sister's room. I'm 33 now, and have remained unmarried and without children. I can't risk it. I can't risk that monster coming back into my life. I've never understood why my parents chose to have kids. They both had been exposed to Tommy during their childhood, so why have Stephanie and I? Maybe they didn't believe he'd come back. But I believe it, and I'm terrified. Because you see, yesterday, my sister gave birth to twins. And that was the third parent, which is very often called Tommy Taffy. It's what it's usually referred to. That was the third parent. A very, very, very disturbing story. Very unsettling. Very detailed. So, we have 2 more stories left. But before that, I just need to take a second to say, fuck Tommy. He sucks. He sucks. Wow, that's so fucking creepy. Yo, Megan sounds kind of like my mom. Oh, does she? Rutro, Tommy tipped the scales. Damn, just how old is Tommy? I don't know, but ugh, it's so unsettling. Ugh, I hate it. Ugh. But this is a no sleep, so that's the whole point of it, is to make you uncomfortable, I think. Probably. So now we have one more that's kind of medium long, and then one that's very long that I saved for the end. So I'm going to take a quick drink. finally able to make it. Oh, hey Deckers, welcome. You just missed probably our most disturbing story, which is probably a good thing. We are down to our last two stories. So the next one is called When Your World Falls Apart. It was made 9 years ago by AL_365. Al365. To be honest, I don't have much hope for Carol. Her head is now bald and covered in red blisters where she scratched too much. She refuses to eat, has to be restrained to stop hurting herself, and her only interaction with psychiatrists is to attack them. Most cases of insanity are random or due to a chemical imbalance, but sometimes I get the impression that the victim didn't have a choice, that insanity is the only option when your world falls apart. You know what every parent's worst nightmare is? To lose a child. 4 years ago, Carol had everything. She had Tim, her loving husband, and together they had Norman, 6 years old, and Chloe, 4 years old. The kids were healthy and smart, and Norman had just entered school. They owned a large yellow house with a nice backyard. They were good friends with their neighbors. Tim and Carol had everything they could have wished for. Then Norman disappeared. Just a few months after he had started school on a warm and sunny Tuesday evening, Norman didn't come home. Several of his classmates saw him leave school and getting on the bus. The driver thought he remembered Norman getting off. While leaving the bus, Norman tripped and nearly fell, but rather than cry, he laughed about it. What a great child, thought the driver. And that's the last time Norman was seen. The police searched the neighborhood, investigated for months, even followed leads out of the country, but Norman was never seen again. And Carol, Tim, and Chloe, not even old enough to understand what it means that your brother won't come back, could do nothing but go to the police station every morning and beg them to do more. Of course, they put up posters, rallied the neighbors, they did everything. But Norman was gone. It is not surprising that Carol became very protective of Chloe. She quit her job to make sure that Chloe would never be alone. When Chloe started school, an expensive one with safety fences all around, Carol would do everything to make sure that Chloe would safely get into the school in the morning and would never be alone when she left school in the evening. They picked up Chloe's friends for play dates just to make sure that the children would play in the safest places possible. Carol, in other words, became overprotective. It took Tim more than a year to convince her that he too would take good care of Chloe. But still, there was no birthday party at a friend's place where Carol would not stand in the corner, making sure at every step that nothing could happen to Chloe. Sure, her fear was excessive. Chloe wasn't even allowed to light or blow a candle, or to walk into the basement, or to go out anywhere alone. That's why Chloe was always happy when her mother was shopping. Tim, too, took care of Chloe. He even allowed her to play in the garden on her own. You know what's worse than losing your child? Losing both of your children. 2 years ago, a bit more than 2 years after Norman's disappearance, Tim was taking care of Chloe. Carol was shopping for gifts for Chloe's upcoming birthday, and taking her to the mall would have been too dangerous, as Carol had always pointed out. Most child abductions, after all, happen in malls. It was a busy Saturday, and Carol was gone for nearly 4 hours. Then she got the call. Tim later described to the police that he was reading on the sofa when Chloe disappeared, that she had played in the garden for several hours, something that she knew would stop the moment Mommy came home, and so always enjoyed especially much. That's written weirdly, sorry. I checked on her every 10 minutes. I knew Carol would freak out if Chloe would hurt herself in any way, so I even made sure that she was dressed in long clothes despite the heat. And I just finished the book. I couldn't have been for more than 15 minutes after I last checked on her, after I saw her playing with her doll on the terrace. And she wasn't there. I mean, there was just no way for her to get out. We had these high fences on 2 sides, and on the third side was just our neighbor. She was always so sweet to Chloe. I couldn't imagine that she would ever do something to her. At this point in the police interview, Tim started crying. That is the point in time Carol lost it the first time. By the way, trigger warning, suicide. She just couldn't process losing her second child. She had done everything to make sure Chloe was safe, and still she disappeared. Carol first went into a full-blown depression and tried to kill herself 2 times. First she used razor blades, but when Tim found her and brought her to the hospital, in the psychiatric unit, Carol tried it a second time by ramming a pen into her throat. It took 6 months until Carol was able to return home. The physical wounds had long healed, but getting Carol out of the depression took much longer. And even then, when she returned home, she was still unstable. Tim took a sabbatical year from his job to care for her. The money was a bit tight, but both of their parents helped Carol and Tim out with their support. But because of the distance, they weren't able to visit very often. Carol spent nearly 6 months in Chloe's room, crying into teddy bears and hugging Barbies. Tim did the household chores, cooked and went shopping, and arranged for Carol to meet her old friends and colleagues whenever possible. Their neighbors and friends were all very supportive. But when all was said and done, Chloe couldn't be found. The police investigated for more than a year after the disappearance. They questioned neighbors and friends, even Tim and Carol themselves. Their direct neighbor was shortly even in custody. But when the neighbor's alibi turned out to be solid, a speed camera shot showed that she was too far away from the house at the time that Chloe disappeared. She too was released. More than a year after Chloe's disappearance, Carol started to get better. She started cooking and cleaning again, and she finally allowed Tim to give some of Chloe's old toys, some of which had belonged to Norman, to charity. A few times she even went out on her own again, but as Tim confided to a few friends, every night Carol would still cry herself to sleep. But at least, Tim said, she stopped blaming him. She stopped accusing him every day of being responsible for Chloe's disappearance. For more than a year, he had heard the same message every day. It's your fault. If you wouldn't have let her in the garden. 6 months ago, Tim had started his work again. That was hard for Carol, but was the only way to save their strained finances and to restart their lives. You cannot live in the past, Tim would say. They are gone, and we have to accept that. Carol would cry, but she would nod between her sobs. They planned to travel the world together, and maybe to try again to have a child. It took Carol several weeks, but she learned to deal with being alone at home. She would chat with the neighbors and go to meetings for parents of lost children. She even started to organize a fundraiser for a new playground in the neighborhood, one she would insist where the neighbors together could organize a watch so that no child ever had to play without oversight. Carol had also taken again to doing the chores in the house. She started cooking, cleaning, and shopping. She tidied all rooms except Tim's holy DIY room, where she only dared to clean the floor and to eliminate the thick layers of dust on the shelves. Finally, Carol started the thing that she had dreaded the most after Chloe had disappeared. She started gardening. She mowed the lawn, trimmed the bushes, and seemed to be getting better from it. Tim wasn't sure all of this was truly a good idea, whether Carol might have another breakdown, but Carol felt her improvement. It was a cathartic experience for her, and she even felt as if it was reconnecting her with Chloe, to be in the last place that Chloe had been, and in the garden that Norman had loved so much. Carol even went so far as to start planting new flowers and bushes. You know what's worse than losing your children? Finding their pieces. Roughly 6 weeks ago, just when things seemed to be going uphill, Carol was renewing the hedge at the end of their garden. She dug a hole to remove an old bush where her spade cracked through something hard, a small bone. Carol figured it was a dead animal and continued digging. Just a few minutes later, she found the hand. Not an old skeleton hand, no, a clearly fresh, half-rotten hand of what must have been a 6-year-old child. Carol, with tears streaming down her face, kept digging. She thought that something might have buried Chloe there, that maybe Chloe had fallen into a small hole, and that somehow they had just overlooked the hill that must have covered her body. Carol dug for nearly half an hour, frantically heaping soil away from where she thought her child was lying. She didn't find more than the hand, and at least that's what her mother says. That's when Carol knew. As her mother says, this is why Carol called the police and her own parents, but not Tim. Within the next 2 hours, the police found 4 more pieces: a rib cage, an entire arm, a chin bone, and a foot, still in small boy shoes. That's when they realized that there wasn't 1 child buried in the garden. It was 2. You know what's worse than finding the pieces of your children? Living with their murderer for 4 years. Tim was arrested at work. The police excavated the whole garden, carefully sieving through the soil, not to miss a single bone, like the small one that Carol had found first and had just thrown away, which was Norman's finger. They found the bodies of 2 dead children, around 6 years of age. The girl, the coroner determined, was buried for around 2 years, the boy for around 4 years. Still, it seemed that it must have been somebody else. Tim denied his guilt, denied he would ever do anything to his children. And Carol believed him. It couldn't have been him. He was the best father I've ever seen. Then, at the bottom of an old metal trunk in Tim's DIY room, wrapped in 2 old towels, police found the heads. Only when she saw them, when Carol herself identified the 2 moldered heads as those of her own children, did Carol break down. As said, I don't have much hope for Carol. She is now here for 4 weeks. There is no hair left on her head. Every day she causes another dark blue or purple bruise to appear on her body, and her fingernails are long either ripped out or chewed down to the flesh. And because most of the time she refuses to eat or drink, none of the damage to her body can heal. The doctors and nurses try their best to help, but there is just nothing we can do to help. Sometimes, when your world falls apart, insanity is just the only option. And that was When Your World Falls Apart. I'm here between calls for work. Oh. That's awesome. Well, I hope that I can provide some entertainment while you're stuck at work. Oh, I gotta go now. Bye. Oh, bye, Psychedelic. I guess that was 10 minutes ago, so I don't know if you're hearing this, but I hope that you have a great rest of your day or night. I am going to take a very quick, 2-minute break, and I will be right back, and when we come back, we will finish the final story, which is my personal favorite. It's very good. Trust me, you're not gonna want to miss this. Sounds good, so we will be right back. I am already back. That was only like 2 minutes. I am back. So, we will now be moving on to the final story. And now this one is my personal favorite. It's got a very different vibe from the other ones that we've been reading so far, and I think you guys will like it. So this one was posted by it's Malmto, Malmto, and this was uploaded 3 years ago. It's called, it's got a pretty long title. Has anyone heard of this city? No one seems to remember it, and something horrific might have happened to it. That is the name of the story, and it is our longest one, so I hope that you are ready to be strapped in. Apparently, there was once a city... Wait. There we go. Apparently, there was once a city in the north of Sweden called Corona, but somehow we've all forgotten about it. I'm a police officer working in Kalix, a municipality close to where the lost city of Corona is supposed to have been. At that place, there are no signs of the city, only a dense forest, but certain details related to my own family makes me certain this place was indeed real. The entire world just forgot about it. I can't imagine how or why, but it's the only conclusion I've been able to reach. For me, this all started when 2 Romanian blueberry pickers came into my small office to report something they had found deep in the dense forest. They didn't know enough Swedish or English to explain exactly what it was that they had found, but it was immediately clear to me that it had terrified them completely. From what I understood, it seemed to involve a human corpse. Eventually, after having brought in an interpreter from the town next to mine, it was revealed that they had stumbled upon a dead child, no more than 10 years old. They led me and 2 of my colleagues, followed by an ambulance, to the location where they had found the child. The sun was setting behind a thick mist when we got there. I lit a cigarette while we left the main road and walked into the forest, to where the child was supposed to be. I felt a bit uncomfortable having to deal with a dead child, but I had handled cases like this before, some car accidents, and didn't feel too affected by it now. It was just another job, or so I thought. The Romanians stopped when we got close and refused to go any further. There was panic in their eyes, more than I expected, even given these extreme circumstances. One of my colleagues stayed with them while the rest of us continued. We soon came upon a huge boulder that had been placed there by the ice sheet that covered Europe during the Ice Age. My colleague walked around it, and a few moments later he came running back, pale, as if he had seen the devil himself. He bent down and puked right in front of me. He said. It's on the other side. Holy shit. I didn't ask him any questions. I only proceeded to check it out for myself, with the medics following behind me. What we found on the other side of the boulder, it wasn't natural. Half the child, a blonde little girl, was fused with the boulder, just as if she had been passing through it as a ghost, and then suddenly turned into a human before she had time to exit the rock. Or, as my colleague later remarked, it was as if she had been teleported into the rock. The girl's sorrowful, dead gaze into the forest seemed to tell a story of tragedy unknown to the living. The medics quickly shied away from her eyes in silence, horrified by the fate she must have suffered. But I couldn't look away. I've never been a religious man, but this experience made me doubt everything I'd believed before. And I don't just mean the bizarre way the poor girl had lost her life, half engulfed by the boulder. There was something else about the girl as well. Something that made me feel completely empty inside. Just as if a piece of my own soul was ripped out of me, leaving an empty hole in my heart that quickly filled up with the sorrow I had never felt before. It was a dreadful feeling, only made worse by the strange fact that a small part of me recognized the girl. I couldn't tell from where. Her face was like the vague memory of a dream recently forgotten. We collected ourselves and started talking, trying to make sense of the situation without any success. While the medics approached the body, I tried to focus on the hard facts while we investigated the scene. The girl was wearing a pink jacket. In one of the pockets, we found an odd-looking flower. Its colors were exotic and resembled the wings of a beetle. And a yellow library card with a text that puzzled us. "The Library of Corona," it said. The girl had written her name on the card as well. When I saw it, my world started spinning. "Isabella Lexelius," it said, in the girl's childish handwriting. "Isn't that your last name, sir?" my colleague said. It is." I didn't know what to say or think. "Well, do you know her?" I don't know. No, I've never seen her before in my entire life. It must be a coincidence." "That's a pretty big coincidence, sir." I didn't respond to that. "There's something on the ground as well," one of the medics said. On the blood-stained moss beneath the girl was a notebook. Must have fallen out of her hand, the one that was hanging limply above the book. I picked it up and opened it. The pages were covered with small text, written with a different handwriting than the girl's. "Sir," one of the medics said, "we'll have to bring some tools to cut her down." Yes," I said absently. "There's one more thing," the medic said. I put the book in a plastic evidence bag. "What?" "There's too much blood." The medic pointed at the ground. "What do you mean there's too much blood?" I asked. "Beneath the boulder, sir," the medic explained. "It's impossible for all that blood to come from a child." A moment of silence. Then I said, "We'll have to come back here with better tools." A day later, we successfully removed the upper body of the girl and brought it back to the morgue where it was examined. We also tried to lift the boulder with the help of a crane, but it wouldn't budge. Instead, we dug a hole under it, but we didn't find any new body parts. All we could do this day was to sample as much of the blood as possible. During the examination of the body, I read the notebook. It contained the story of the city of Corona. I was convinced it was fiction, a deranged story written by the man I thought must have killed the girl, until a few weeks ago when the forensic lab called me. I still have a hard time believing it, but they told me there's no other way. They had tested the DNA of the girl and compared it to mine because of her last name. It was my idea since I didn't want anyone to suspect anything. We didn't think it would reveal anything, but it did. The 10-or-so-year-old girl, Isabella, was my daughter. I was sure it wasn't possible. 10 years earlier, I lived with my ex-wife, and I never cheated on her, and certainly didn't have any children with her. We stayed together for 5 more years, so I would have known if she had a baby during that time, and yet there was nothing wrong with the test. Below is a transcript of the notebook. I've typed it out here in hopes that someone will remember the city of Corona, or someone who might have lived in it. Please contact me if you have any information. This is what was inside the notebook. I'm gonna take a quick drink. This was inside the notebook. My name is Helena Fredrickson. 5 years ago, I was a different person. I was younger back then, not just in the ordinary sense, but in spirit too. There was joy in my life, and I had hopes and dreams. That's all gone now. I don't have that much time to write this down, but I will try and explain what happened to us, to our entire community, as well as I can. The event, as we have come to call it, occurred on July 9th of 2013. I was only visiting Corona over the day to take my niece Isabella to the grand opening of the Red Grove, the city's new amusement park. It was supposed to be the biggest one in Sweden, and Isabella had begged her parents to go to the grand opening, but neither of them had been able to, due to work. So they called me and asked me to do it for them. I was their go-to person for when they needed help with Isabella, the only one they trusted. How I wish that hadn't been the case now, considering what happened. We arrived pretty early, a few hours before the opening, so that we wouldn't need to stay in line the whole day to get inside. The weather was amazing. It had rained earlier in the morning, so we had been a bit worried, but when we got to the city, there wasn't a cloud in sight. Isabella couldn't stop talking about how much fun we would have, and it warmed my heart to see her so happy. It took us a bit longer than expected to get to the amusement park, since one of the main streets had been closed off for a military parade. This didn't bother us that much. It rather increased the feeling of celebration in the air. To avoid the parade, we had to take a bus to the city center, the Freya Square, and from there we had to take the subway to the yellow neutral business cluster, the tallest skyscrapers in Sweden. It was possible for us to walk to the Red Grove from there. There were people everywhere. It turned out that a lot of them had taken a ferry down the river that I didn't know about. This meant we had to stand in line after all. Isabella didn't mind, but I knew she would get hungry soon, and I worried that it would ruin her mood. Luckily, there was a man selling hot dogs from a cart that he was pushing down the line. I bought a hot dog and a soda for Isabella. Her parents didn't really like when I bought her junk food, but a day like this, I thought they would understand. The man was also selling red balloons to the children. Isabella wanted one. I tried to tell her that she would have to carry it around all day, and that there would be more balloons inside the amusement park, but she wouldn't listen. Reluctantly, I bought her a balloon as well. Isabella accidentally let go of the balloon. I feared it would make her sad, but it didn't seem to bother her that much. We looked at the balloon as it rose up into the air and drifted away. Soon, it was but a red dot against the vast blue sky. Then suddenly, it vanished.
Where did it go?
Isabella said. I couldn't explain it. It had just disappeared. I don't know, I said. Maybe it popped? But something, an uneasy feeling I couldn't rationalize, made me doubt that. Then, only a few minutes later, strong winds came from every direction. It carried a smell with it that reminded me of something rotten.
Ew,
Isabella said, as her long white hair was blowing in the wind.
What's that smell?
I held her hand harder. I don't know, I said. People looked around, confused, and their joyful voices became concerned. Something was happening, but no one knew what it was. Sirens echoed in the distance, seemingly coming from the business cluster. Oh my God, a woman said and pointed toward the skyscrapers. The top of the building is gone! It wasn't that easy to see, but she was right. The top of the tallest building was gone, as if it had been cut off with a knife. Isabella was too short to see it, but she picked up that something wasn't right on everyone's faces, and she became worried herself. I think we need to get away from here, I said, acting completely on instinct. I don't think it's safe. Isabella teared up.
But the opening, aren't we?
We will come back later, sweetheart, I said, as I walked away from the crowd with her. When one of the ferries were just about to leave, we quickly stepped aboard. A few others joined us, but most of the people stayed behind in the hopes that everything would be sorted out. Isabella cried, but she wasn't mad. As the ferry slowly drove away from the riverside promenade, a commotion of some kind erupted among the crowd back on land. I couldn't see what was going on, but suddenly everyone screamed in terror and tried to run towards the water. They were clearly escaping from something, but I couldn't see what it was. All I saw was people stepping on each other while they tried to jump into the river and swim away. It was a horrible sight, and I'm glad Isabella wasn't tall enough to see over the railing. Next, the sirens from the emergency alert system began blasting its eerie sound of imminent catastrophe. Everyone asked questions no one had any answers to. Most people I heard thought we were under attack, either by terrorists or the Russians. I picked up my phone to call my sister, but there was no signal. I tried with Isabella's phone as well, without any luck. I soon discovered that no one had any signal. At the sides of the river that passed through the city, people were looking out their windows trying to get a glimpse of what was going on, but the only thing they could see that was out of the ordinary was the cut-off building in the yellow neutral business cluster.
Look!
Isabella pointed at the sky.
I've never seen such a big bird before.
An enormous bird-like creature soared high above us. It was pitch black. Although it was impossible to say for sure, it seemed to be just as confused about seeing us as we were seeing it. It circled the city center a few times and then flew away again. The sight of the giant bird, or whatever it truly was, turned our anxious confusion into terror. We still don't know what had happened, but now we knew it didn't have anything to do with terrorists or some foreign power. This was something else. Something impossible to believe, and yet, at the same time, impossible to deny. The ferry let us off a bit further down the river, close to Freya Square. People seemed to be in a state of panic, although no one knew what was wrong. Some were packing their cars to escape the city, others were running somewhere, perhaps to their loved ones, but most people clustered around police officers, city workers, or military personnel from the parade to try and get some information. But they only got the same answer over and over again. Yelled at them so that it could be heard over the sirens from the emergency alert system, that nothing was known, and that they needed to return to their homes and listen to the radio for more information.
How are we supposed to listen to the radio when the power is out?
The voice came from an old woman.
Look around, there's no power.
She was right. Go home and close your windows and wait for the power to come back, a policeman said. We don't know what's going on, but the safest thing to do now is to follow the procedure. He was interrupted by something happening a few meters away. The first person who had tried to leave the city, a man on a loud motorcycle, had come back. I was carrying Isabella, comforting her at the same time as I tried to hear what the man on the bike was trying to tell everyone. I pushed through to get closer to him. He walked to the center of the square and climbed up on the foot of the statue of Freya. Few people believed him, but everyone that had seen the creature in the sky had no doubt he was telling the truth, however impossible it seemed. There's no way out, the man yelled. The main road's cut off at the edge of the city, and there's only jungle. I can't explain it. I'm sorry, but it's true. We are surrounded by a dense, thick jungle, and there is no way around it. Then it's true, a policeman whispered to himself next to me. For the love of God, it was all true. I asked him what he meant. First, he didn't want to acknowledge my question, but when he saw my confusion and tears in my niece's innocent eyes, he turned to me and said quietly, Before we lost contact with the helicopter that was surveying the parade, the pilot said something that didn't make sense. He was crashing. Something had cut off his rotor blades, and he said that it all had changed somehow. The view had changed. Before he hit the ground, he yelled that he had seen a jungle to the west and an ocean to the east. More and more reports came in, and even though it was impossible to tell rumors from facts, they were all telling the same story. The entire world around the city had been replaced in an instant. The city was the same, but the sky above it wasn't. Eventually, the screaming sirens went silent. The cars stopped beeping their horns, and the cacophony of voices died out. An uncanny silence fell over the city. The feeling was beyond unreal. I didn't know what any of this meant. I tried to explain it to my niece, but she was only 5 years old and she couldn't understand. She wanted to go home to her parents, and I didn't know what to tell her. She was tired and needed rest, so I went to a hostel nearby and paid for a room. Soon, the economy of the city would collapse, but for the first few days in this new unknown world, people still accepted money as payment. What followed was 5 years of unending trials and hardships, a continuous battle for survival with no hope for help or rescue. It started during the first night. The sun, identical to our own, yet new and strange, sat due north instead of west, and was replaced by unrecognizable stars covering the entire sky. As I looked up at them from the small window in our room, I didn't feel awe, but rather I felt completely lost. The strangest feeling during all these years must have been the paradoxical sensation of familiarity on the streets, mixed with the awareness of total displacement. I think this was partly why people kept close to the city center, to drown themselves in the illusion of being home, even though they knew, deep down, that they couldn't escape their fate as stranded in the unknown. Then, as I leaned out the window, I heard the sounds. People screaming, gunshots, cars driving madly through the streets without anywhere to go, and the occasional odd howling that made my blood run cold. I never saw anything of what happened that night, but it changed the population. More than 2 million people forever. I closed the window and hid behind the bed with Isabella. She wanted to cry for her mother, but I kept my hand over her trembling mouth. The next night was calmer, probably because no one dared venture outside. During the days, I soon realized the threat didn't come from the unknown jungle outside of the city, but from the people within it. It was impossible to tell how many crimes were committed, but given what I saw with my own eyes, looting, robberies, and even murders, I figured the rate of crime must have gone up by a lot. However, it wasn't total anarchy. The police and the few military units that had been in town for the parade kept some vital order to the community. Since ordinary people didn't have guns, the police and the military weren't threatened by the average citizen. A leader stepped forward, the man on the motorcycle, and after a few weeks, everyone seemed to cooperate peacefully. The food that was left in the stores were mostly distributed fairly, and everyone that could work seemed to do it without hesitation. Even I. I'm gonna take a quick drink. The scientists that had been working at the university at the time of the event couldn't figure out what had happened, but with the help of hundreds of citizens, they managed to build a small nuclear power plant that could return electricity to the city. I mostly helped out with that project. I didn't know anything about nuclear physics, but I did what little I could. It was amazing what we were capable of as a people, and in all my dreadfulness, a feeling of pride grew in my chest. Although our time in this world wasn't simple, far from it. Aside from my personal problem with keeping Isabella healthy and safe, which I succeeded with, although she never felt safe, there were 3 major problems that kept growing larger for every week. The first one was the food and water situation. Some people had managed to grow wheat and potatoes in parks and on soccer fields, but it wasn't enough. We were running out of food and water. It did rain from time to time, but very few people felt safe drinking the rainwater. To battle this problem, and to find solutions to some other problems as well, expeditions were sent out to explore the jungle. These typically ended the same way, that is, with no one coming back. Only once or twice did someone manage to return to the city, but they weren't themselves anymore. It was as if something in the jungle had captured their souls and let their bodies walk back unscratched. The second problem was nature. It seemed to have spared us for the first couple of months, but soon after we got the electricity back, it turned on us. It took a while before I saw it with my own eyes, but seemingly at random, mysterious creatures entered the city. Sometimes they just walked right through it, never to return again. A policewoman, one of the new recruits, told me that she had followed a naked blue child as it solemnly walked into the city, and then back out of it again. At other times, indescribable monsters wreaked havoc on the streets, killing as many people as they could before returning to wherever they came from. At one point, and I actually saw for myself, an enormous centipede, pure white with hundreds of red eyes, suddenly appeared from a manhole. It quickly climbed up against a building, as if it knew exactly what it was doing, and entered one of the windows on the top floor. Next came the screams from the people inside the building. A few escaped, but everyone else inside were ripped to shreds. Only after about 5 minutes did the centipede exit from the building, from the entrance, its white segmented body stained with blood, and returned down the manhole. These attacks, as they were called, aroused fear and panic in all of us. Although it didn't happen that often, it happened often enough for everyone to be on edge all the time. The third problem also didn't become noticeable until later. It was a problem of health. There was no pattern to who was affected or not, but some people, probably no more than 1%, got sick. It started out like a fever and slowly progressed with nightmarish mutations randomly hitting the body. Most of these mutations made the victims handicapped and disfigured, but sometimes, very rarely, the victims developed properties that were seemingly beneficial to them. The most extreme case of this that I saw was a young girl who grew a third eye in the middle of her forehead. The iris of the new eye glittered with amazing colors, and the girl claimed that she could use the eye to see other people's emotions. At the beginning of the health crisis, the sick people were treated badly, just as if they had been monsters from the jungle. This treatment only got worse when it was revealed that the creatures from outside never attacked the sick. At one point, a mob gathered at Freya Square, set on chasing the sick people out of the city. Luckily, this was stopped by the military. In the end, however, the sick people were sent into the jungle, not to be away with them, though, but to make use of their immunity to the nature of this world. This turned into a huge success that eventually solved the food and water problem. They could venture out and explore the surrounding area and return with edible fruits, vegetables, and small mammal-like animals that they hunted. This was a turning point for us. And then luck struck again. All attempts at fishing had failed so far, but all of a sudden, there were fish everywhere in the river. We soon learned that there were different periods for when the fish were out to sea or close to land. However, as soon as they came close to land, mysterious purple thunderstorms that lasted weeks tormented the city. And yet, we survived. Many people didn't, of course, but life was possible. In the end, we prevailed. During the 5 years that followed, there weren't that many catastrophes, and our focus on survival kept most of our thoughts of home away. Even Isabella thought less and less of her parents as she grew older. Over time, most people got used to the bizarre situation they had found themselves in back in July of 2013. Many people did commit suicide, yes, but most people chose to live in this unknown land. 2 events, however, changed things. First, it was what happened to a planned expedition at sea. Hundreds of people, mostly men, decided to venture out into the ocean with one of the luxury cruisers that had been moored next to the city. This was going to be a great adventure and perhaps a way to find some answers to where we had ended up. It inspired all of us. Thousands of people, Isabella and I included, had gathered to watch as the huge boat slowly sailed out. It all felt familiar to that day 5 years earlier when we had waited for the amusement park to open. We all stared at the horizon as the boat, named Birdo de Espero, turned into a small dot against the setting sun. We imagined that amazing adventures they would be on and looked forward to their return. But then something that must have been larger than anything we had seen so far came out of the water and swallowed Birdo de Espero whole. Some people screamed and others cried. This was a hard blow to the city. Just knowing that a being like that, a being able to eat an entire luxury cruiser in one bite, could exist, deprived many people their hopes of a future. The next event was different. It was a miracle, to say the least. It happened only a month after the destruction of Birdo de Hespero. A military guard, a young man who had only been 15 at the time of our disappearance from Earth, discovered that when he stood at a certain place at Freya Square, he could tune into a specific radio station from our world. The station's name was Synthwave Mix, and dedicated most of its broadcasting to that kind of music. Hope returned immediately, but this time the hope was different from the one we had spent 5 years building up within ourselves. This was the hope of seeing our loved ones again, the hope to return home. The people at the university investigated the area to try and determine where the radio signals were coming from. They didn't have much success, but soon realized that they emanated from the ground beneath Freya Square. While the area was investigated by scientists, ordinary people showed up en masse. They all had radios of different kinds with them, like children carrying stuffed animals to feel safe, hoping to tune in to Synthwave Mix and get a taste of their lost home. Of course, the area where the radio station could be heard was too small, and the police had to chase everyone away to give the scientists room they needed. A few days later, though, the scientists placed a set of large speakers at the foot of the statue of Freya and connected them to the receiver they were using to listen in on the radio station. Day and night, the relaxed, somewhat melancholic synthetic music played non-stop to the entire city. People congregated around the statue. They even defied the dangers of the night. This became our city's new tradition, ending the day by going to the statue and sitting down around it, as if in prayer, became our pilgrimage. It wasn't exactly the music that drew people to the square, but rather its origin. Still, the electronic melodies soon turned into a symbol of all of our hopes and desires. From time to time, people got up and danced, sometimes while crying from a bittersweet joy difficult to explain. Although, the thing that made us all go silent and become totally focused was when the host said something. Usually they only spoke about the music they were broadcasting, completely unaware that an entire city full of people were listening to them almost religiously. But on rare occasions, they talked about the world outside. At those times, it felt like our hearts collectively stopped in anticipation. Would they say something about us? About their efforts to figure out where we had all gone and how to bring us back? But there was never any news about us. Just as if they had already forgotten about us, or never known about us at all. The tragic fate of the city of Corona never came up. Yet, we never lost fate. It took a long time, and now I'm getting closer to the present day. But eventually, the scientists decided that it would be worthwhile digging a large hole right next to where the radio waves seemed to seep out of the ground. This was no easy task, and neither was it safe. The work took weeks. Again, we all helped. No one really knew what exactly we were looking for. We only knew that it was something. When we reached the bottom, where the rock was too hard to dig through, a mountain of dirt covered the entire square. Our efforts hadn't been in vain, we discovered. Right beneath the place where the radio waves had been picked up, there was a small hole in the bedrock. People were asked to back away from it, while the scientists investigated it. First, they tried to measure how deep it was. This took some time, since it was hard to find a rope long enough. In the end, it was estimated to be about 700 meters deep. Next, some equipment was sent. Sorry, I'm going to take a quick drink. Next, some equipment was sent down tied to the end of the rope. and to everyone's surprise, everything that was sent down was swallowed by the hole. Of course, no one knew where it went, but we all thought the same thing, that somehow it had returned home. It was a reasonable assumption given that the only thing coming out of the hole, the radio waves, came from Earth. We all rejoiced in this discovery. More experiments were done, and although some questions remained unanswered, the consensus, even among the scientists, was that the hole really was a portal back to our own world. There were two large problems that needed to be solved, though. First was the safety. Every time something tied to the rope disappeared at the bottom of the hole, the rope was cut off, just like the skyscraper 5 years earlier. This meant that it was possible that whoever entered the hole would be cut off as well. However, this problem was solved pretty soon. By tying a camera to the rope connected to a screen above ground, it was discovered that the rope was only cut off when pulled back. As long as it wasn't pulled back, the screen still received signals from the camera. The camera never recorded anything other than darkness on what was assumed to be the other side, but since it continued to work until the rope was pulled back, this didn't seem to be such a big problem. After all, some technical issues were expected under the circumstances. The second problem was that the hole was too small for anyone to fit into. Many attempts were made to widen the hole, but the bedrock seemed to be made out of a stronger material than any of our machines could tear into. This was extremely frustrating. It made us feel like we had reached the finish line only to discover that we were unable to cross it. In the end, one of the scientists said she wanted to send her 10-year-old son down the hole. He was small enough to fit into it. This was widely debated for quite some time before it was approved. The mother argued that the city of Corona was no place for her son, and that all the evidence suggested the hole was the only way home. The boy was brave. He knew he would probably never see his poor mother again, but still went through with it. He was given a walkie-talkie, and after a tear-filled goodbye to his mother, he was sent down the 700-meter-steep, pitch-black hole. He was instructed to radio in after he reached the other side, confirming he was safe. After the rope was pulled back, the mother waited and waited for her son to report. However, he never did. For weeks, the mother sat at the edge of the hole, under merciless heat and under pouring rain, calling her son over and over again with her walkie-talkie. No one knew what, if anything, had gone wrong. Since no other radio waves had been picked up, other than synthwave mix, it was possible that other radio waves simply couldn't enter into our world for some reason. Still, the authority deemed the hole too unsafe for anyone else to enter. This didn't change people's minds, though. The hole represented the only true hope we had felt in years, and given all the horrible things in our world that could destroy us at any moment as easily as it is for us to blow out a candle, the small risk of going through the hole seemed to be more than acceptable. The hole was guarded by the police, but most of the police shared the city's collective opinion that the hole was the only way out. Not for any of the adults, but for our children. And now I'm sitting here, in the room I paid for 5 years ago, writing this down. During the last few weeks, many parents have been sending their children down the hole at night. This world is truly no place for them. Although they could survive, they deserve better. Hence, like many others, I've decided to send Isabella home. When I told her about it, she looked at me with a happiness in her eyes I hadn't seen since we were transported to this dreadful, godforsaken world. I've been writing this all day now. It's my testimony to what happened to Corona. I will give this notebook to Isabella. I'm sure she will be able to give it to her father. Somehow, I know it in my heart that she will find her way home to her parents. Soon it will be dark, and I will bring Isabella to Freya Square one last time. I'm sorry it took so long. Helena. And that is the story of Has Anyone Heard of This City? No one seems to remember it, and something horrific might have happened to it. it's such a sad story. Oh, it's so well written too. Oh, my heart. That's so sad. Oh, my gosh. Well, that was our final story for the day. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. Oh, Gengar is back. What happened? You missed a couple of stories and probably the beginning of this one. I hope that you're able to catch it still though. It's definitely my favorite story. But yes, so that was our spooky time stories for the end of September. If there are any no sleeps or creepypastas that you guys personally enjoy and would like to hear me read, definitely blah, 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 blah. I've been speaking way too much. I'm so sorry. Definitely leave them in the comments and I will go through them if they are tame enough or if they're ones where I can, censor out anything that's too bad. I will definitely go ahead and read them in a future stream. So yes, any stories that you guys like, let me know. Otherwise, thank you guys so much for listening. I hope that you guys have a great rest of your day, and I hope that you will be able to sleep, despite reading so many no sleeps. Thank you guys for watching. Have a good day. Bye!